playback speed just went up. Payne looked pretty damn fast there. Hunter Hawkins, God, I love the running commentary he's got here.
Somebody cares about veggies. It's not me, but somebody.
Yeah. Well, there.
Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubs at the Club, and we're going off script immediately. Captain 58 in the comment section, is your mascot generic? Just throw the word mountain in there and spice it up. Hawks? Boring. Mountain Hawks? That sounds tough. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tubs at the Club, brought to you by Snake River Stampede Whiskey. We'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the show. We are the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network, previewing this weekend's playoff game in the Kibbe Dome. The Idaho Vandals versus the Lehigh Mountain Hawks. Martin, the man in Moscow. How's it going, dude?
It's going well. It's getting a little cold in Moscow, but that's what fall. That's what FCS football is all about now. That we're playing, we're getting ready to preview a playoff football.
And thankfully, that playoff game is going to be in the dome where it's sunny and bright and warm. Brave, bold Bryan Marceau. What are you thinking about this weekend's playoff game?
I'm thinking I'm stoked as hell for the second round. I'm thinking it's hysterical that Idaho gets screwed with the 8th seed, but then winds up with the single most favorable second round matchup. So hey, things. Let's just say things get worse, right?
Yeah. Hey, I mean, guys, we
could be sitting at home right now talking about signing day stuff.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
will be coming eventually, but waiting for football stuff to get through first.
Thank you for that, Martin. So we will get to Martin's recruiting episode at some point when the season is closer to being over. But right now, it is not over, guys. We're in the playoffs for the 3rd straight year. Idaho in the playoffs, 2nd straight year with a playoff game in the Kibbe Dome. Bryan Marceau, our president of the Bryan Harsin fan club. Bryan Marceau. I'm gonna let you take the wheel on this one, man. What do you want to talk about with Lehigh? we could go about the team. We could talk about that absolute catastrophe that we watched last weekend. I still don't even know how Lehigh got here, honestly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know how Lehigh got here. I also don't know how it was a pretty circuitous route to becoming the head of the Bryan Harrison fan club, but hey, you know what? We all have strange paths we travel, right? So, man, the thing I want to talk about first with Lehigh is you watched the game against Richmond, the Lehigh-Richmond game. And I got to say, that was sometimes when we talk FCS playoffs, there's for us, like West Coasters, I feel like there can be a version of accidental East Coast bias that pops up because like, hey, teams in like the CAA have 10 wins. 10's a big number. That can sound intimidating. I know on our show, I have for a while said I was not worried about Richmond because Richmond they beat some pretty shitty teams by just a few points. And Richmond absolutely gave last week's game away, which makes, because, hey, this does exist in the FCS, Lehigh is kind of the Cinderella story of the FCS playoffs right now. There are, we'll obviously get into individual parts, but Lehigh is a team that they do not have any give up in them at all. So like whatever you understand about the individual breakdown, which we'll touch about, please keep in mind, Lehigh is a scrappy team that was getting their ass kicked for about 75-80% of the game against Richmond, except Richmond, like they turned into Northern Colorado once Richmond got into the, goal line territory, and then Lehigh, to their credit, toughened up. So I guess the first thing I want to say about Lehigh, it's hard to know what to extrapolate off of what we've seen. Hey, full disclosure, Lehigh looked like they're inferior to what we see week by week in the Big Sky. But we do know Lehigh is scrappy. We know they've won a lot of games to get to this second round matchup. And we know there is nothing. Lehigh is going to walk into the Kibbie Dome probably feeling like they got nothing to lose because that's what happened against Richmond last week. And I think Lehigh, who in the Patriot League, look, hey, garbage league compared to the Big Sky, right? So like these stats are 100% apples to oranges when we talk about them. But Lehigh in the Patriot League had the best passing defense, the best rush defense, the best rushing offense, the shittiest passing offense. So like, hey, that's a pretty clear profile. It's a team at their level played tough defense and they like to run the football, which you could tell by those awful picks Lehigh threw against Richmond. I know why they like to run the football, but I guess that's where I'm starting with is Idaho is going to be pretty heavily favored. There's a lot of ways for Idaho to win this game, but Lehigh didn't get to the second round of the playoffs by being a soft team that's ready to get their ass kicked. That's my first takeaway is we're going to look like, hey, never mind stats, never mind the large amount of Patriot League, all league performers on Lehigh. We saw the character of Lehigh last week, and it's a scrappy group of guys who are going to be ready to claw for every inch in the Kibbie Dome.
Yeah, as Captain 58 says, it looked like they had a chip on their shoulder in that Richmond game. Crew had 76. That game was Weber State versus Sac State Light. Bryan, you mentioned like, hey, the thing you got to take away from Lehigh here is they did not quit. They did not bend. They did not break. They somehow fought that game to the very end. Richmond led it for almost the entire game. They took the lead midway through the first quarter. Lehigh ended up taking the lead with 1 minute left in the second quarter, and then Richmond immediately drove down the field, kicked a field goal to take the lead back. They ended up with a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter. And Lehigh came back from their first 2-score fourth quarter deficit since 2013. They had 328 total yards. Bryan, we talked about this after that game. 160 of those yards came on 3 plays. Legitimately, half of their offensive output came from 3 plays. They had 200 total passing yards, 95 of which came on a 40-yard shot and then a 55-yard touchdown. And then they had 128 rushing yards when you take the sack numbers out of it. And they had a 65-yard rushing touchdown. So both their passing and rushing yards, they got about half of each of those off of just chunk plays, which, hey, that's, chunk plays are chunk plays. Like they still happened, but it makes you feel pretty good as a Vandal looking at that and seeing, especially the way that it happened. Bryan, the 65-yard rush was because Richmond filled the box and had nobody in the back, and the running back got past the linebackers, and it was done. It was over. I now that it's been 3-4 days, you can't take Lehigh for granted, but man, I feel really, really good about this matchup for Idaho, Bryan.
Yeah, Richmond defensively, reputationally, Richmond's a good defensive team. They looked it for a good amount of time against Lehigh. Again, I'm going to say no team playing last week popped off as like significantly better than like the top half of the Big Sky. So whatever, like, hey, Lehigh not being able to have regular drives against Richmond, I expect that's what we're going to see this week. So, like, in short, there are many, many ways Idaho wins this game. There are very few ways Idaho should lose this game. So I think to understand Lehigh, the best like premise for us is like, hey, if this game is close, because that's what Lehigh is going to need to take a win or to get a win. Like Simon Miller says, don't take them Lehighly. Who are some guys who are going to matter? Well, on the offensive side of the ball, look, Lehigh is going to need big plays again, because I don't think they're going to be able to have sustained drives against Idaho. Idaho looks vastly better defensively than Richmond. The two big names, you already hit them in the running back room. They're both first team All Patriot League talents, Luke Yoder and Jaden Green. Both guys rushed for 10 touchdowns on the season. Both guys average over 5 yards a carry between the two. You're a little over 1,800 yards rushing. That's honestly where Lehigh, offensively, you're going to have to look at Lehigh as what they're going to try to do. Now, Idaho can game plan for this, obviously. But I think the Patriot League's worst passing offense, which they looked at against Richmond, there was like one single long pass play for Lehigh. It was not a long pass play. It was like a 2-yard pass, and the receiver just made everyone miss. I think Lehigh is going to feel like they have to run the ball. And those two, Yoder and Green, are going to be the workhorse backs for Lehigh, who it's honestly, it's kind of weird to talk about Lehigh. Gary Graybout in the comment section saying a bit ironic that getting an arguably low seed gets a soft Patriot League opponent after the bye. Yeah, you're 100%. It's weird to talk about this team because honestly, like, hey, full disclosure, I don't think Idaho's going to have trouble stopping Lehigh on the ground, because Richmond didn't have a ton of trouble stopping Lehigh on the ground. Truly, it was lack of discipline on Richmond or poor defensive play calling on a total of 4 plays or so. Had that not happened, Lehigh is essentially shut out against Richmond. So I think in the first half, Lehigh had the ball for like 8 minutes. And Richmond is not a great offensive team by any means, especially once you get into the red zone. So those are the names on the offensive side of the ball I think you got to pay attention to. Is if Lehigh is going to keep this competitive, they're going to be able to run it a little bit better than you think. And other part is I think quarterback Hayden Johnson. Now Hayden Johnson, he's a running threat too. Rushed for 4 touchdowns, rushed for a little over 238 yards on the season so far. I mean, maybe you can think of him as like he's a kind of dual threat, but look, Lehigh's going to have to get some yardage on the ground and break some big plays against Idaho. That's it.
Well, and that's the thing, Bryan. A lot of his rushing yards came when he wasn't the starting quarterback. Hayden Johnson was only named their starting quarterback in their last 3 games. He's a true freshman that was backing up Perry, I think was the guy's last name. I don't remember it well enough. But they finally decided to get rid of the 2 quarterback system and put Dante Perry. Thank you. They put Hayden Johnson in. Legitimately, his 3rd start was that Richmond game. His 4th career start is going to be against Idaho. So his numbers are a lot better throwing the ball since he's been in charge of the offense. Essentially, he's 40 for 52 in these last 3 games. So he's completing 77% of his passes, 518 yards, 6 touchdowns, 2 picks. Like a little bit better production from their passing game when he's now the starting quarterback. But Bryan, like you said, this was the worst passing offense in the Patriot League. I mean, this team is going to be between Yoder and Green. Those running backs are going to have to go off. Jeffrey Jamil or Jamil, forgot the pronunciation. Sorry. It's kind of my thing. He was the little receiver. They have 2 receivers that have more than 10 catches this entire season. One of them is 6'4", one of them is 5'8". Jeffrey Jamil, the little 5'8" one, leads the team in every single category. He had the best night of his career, best day of his career against Richmond just last week. This is not a team, Bryan, that is maybe inspiring fear.
They picked up their wins. There's 129 FCS teams, and according to Massey, Lehigh, they have the number 85 strength of schedule, which probably spiked after the Richmond game too. So, this is 100% not the same as like Pioneer Conference non-scholarship, but it's as close to that type of matchup as you could possibly want, which I guess is my way of saying, isn't wow, like this actually, like, honestly, this might be the worst. This might be the worst team Idaho's played this year. Like, except, I mean, a question for you, because again, like we do need to talk about Lehigh defensively, because that is relative to who they played, to where they played. Number 1 passing defense, number 1 rushing defense in their conference. That's not nothing. Who did you compare Lehigh to in the Big Sky talent wise? Or who do you think is a Big Sky team that Lehigh, if Lehigh was playing a Big Sky schedule, or Lehigh got to pick a couple Big Sky out of conference games, who would Lehigh want to be playing to, like, pull off a win?
Man, Bryan, I honestly, you're circling Northern Colorado as a win for them.
Cal Poly. What about Cal Poly?
And Cal Poly probably, and then honestly beyond that, it feels like a crapshoot to me, Bryan. This is like I hate to like punch down at a team, especially when we haven't seen them anywhere near as much. It's much harder to watch Patriot League games than it is to just pull up Northern Colorado every weekend and laugh at the McCaffrey family. And unfortunately, Ed Lamb hasn't really gotten that turnaround off the ground yet. But Bryan, this is a team that played, counting this weekend's game against Idaho, they played 3 teams with winning records. Richmond last weekend and FBS Army in the first weekend. Like, this is not a team. They have 9 wins, but this is 9 wins against teams that went 500 or worse in the Patriot League and the Ivy League. Not necessarily teams that went 500 in the Big Sky or the MVFC. Like, this is a team that they schedule merchants. I hate to say it, but schedule merchants. Now, again, Idaho could completely screw this up.
They're in the right, like, I wouldn't say schedule merchants. I'd say like they're in the right conference.
By schedule merchants, Bryan, I mean, like, I don't think this team should have been probably above 24 out of 24 teams in the playoffs. This team is not particularly a conference merchants. Thank you, Patty Frakes. Yeah, just really. Yes, auto bid merchants. That's what I was getting at, Patty. Look, they got in because they won a dog shit conference. The Ivy League sucks. The Patriot League's not much better. When you make up your entire schedule of those teams, man, there's not a lot here that inspires fear. To keep saying that, like, there's just not a lot about this team that screams they could win in the Big Sky week in and week out. Like, I would expect Eastern to beat this team. I would expect Idaho State to have a pretty good shot with this team. Like, I'm not that concerned about this at this moment. Now, Simon Miller mentions in the comments the same kind of thing you did. You can't overlook them. They have nothing to lose. That's always dangerous. Like, they're having one of the best seasons that they're going to have in a very long time. And so you can't overlook it. But on paper,
to be fair, Richmond overrated at 9, right? We can say that now when Richmond loses at home to a team they clearly should have beat. But not, hey, give Lehigh the credit here. Richmond is a bad red zone team, but defensively, Lehigh held up their end of the bargain, and they made Richmond look like a very bad red zone team. Lehigh probably made Richmond look worse in the red zone than most of the CAA. And I'm saying that because Richmond won 10 games. You can't win 10 games looking like Northern Colorado in the red zone every time down. So Richmond defensively, what I thought, hey, maybe that could translate, or at least partially translate, is not one like Lehigh. Richmond did beat the shit out of them until they got into the red zone. But once Richmond got into the red zone, Lehigh pretty much was able to completely bottle up the Richmond ground game and try to make Richmond quarterback, I don't care what the guy's name is because he's out of the playoffs, and try to make that guy beat them, which he could not because he's not very good. Like, now this is Jack Lane's different, but this is just to say Lehigh, when it mattered defensively, was able to impose their will against a CAA team. I think that's the part of Richmond that could translate best against a Big Sky team, that Richmond's going to need this to be a lower scoring game.
You mean Lehigh, correct?
Sorry, Lehigh. Jesus Christ. They're going to need Lehigh needs this to be a lower scoring game. And Lehigh is probably going to take care of this, the lower scoring game part, I just don't think they're going to be able to score a ton against Idaho. But Lehigh defensively, they can make teams make mistakes if you're predictable. Lehigh showed they can impose their will. They can stop teams from rushing. And it's at least a team that you'd say looked like, hey, Weber State, they couldn't stop anyone defensively, right? It was a mix of like talent plus execution. Like, hey, like all of the above was Weber State problem. Lehigh, I think, maximizes the talent they have. And you could call them a good, sound defensive team. And I guess that is the part before we talk about Idaho that I think is more of the cause for concern if you're a Vandal, is that Lehigh defensively did not beat themselves at all against Richmond, even when Richmond was keeping that defense on the field for a very long amount of time for most of that game.
Yeah, defensively, this is a pretty solid, pretty deep team, Brian. I will say I get a lot of feelings like Idaho 2022 from this team. There are 36 freshmen, I think, on the roster, and the two deep is riddled with guys that are freshmen. Very much a roster and a program in transition. Their coach did win Coach of the Year in the Patriot League. Kevin Cahill getting them to 9 wins this year after they've been not good for quite a long time. But on the defense, you mentioned they didn't let Richmond beat them. In the comment section, a couple different people mentioning Lehigh lost both of their defensive ends last week. Matt Spatney and Tyler Ochojski. Matt Spatney had 11.5 sacks this year, almost led the FCS in it. But two different guys, both stretchered off, both their starting defensive ends. I did see from @LFN on Twitter, Lehigh Football Nation, supposedly both guys were released from the hospital the following day. They are listed on the depth chart as the starters. We'll see if they're actually going to be coming back or not. Again, we don't really know what the injury was, and it's tough to sometimes get FCS injury reports, but that's a big deal. Their nose tackle TJ Burke was first team all conference. I think he's got Lehigh's record for squat. Like he's a monster. He's strong. Linebacker is a really deep position for them, Brian. They lost their all conference linebacker right before the Richmond game, led the team in tackles, second in tackles for loss, third in
You're talking about Mike DiNucci.
Yes, Mike DiNucci. Mike DiNucci out for the year. Was the leading tackler on the team up until the Richmond game when Bryson Edwards, their other healthy linebacker, jumped over him. The third linebacker is a sophomore who plays a bunch. He's got 50-some tackles and quite a handful of tackles for loss. So they lose a big stud there, but they have the depth to replace him. My concern, Brian, for the Lehigh defense is their secondary. They do have a bunch of defended passes. I looked over the 4 starters. Each guy has multiple interceptions, except the one corner who only has 1 interception has 7 tipped passes. So pretty solid numbers from their secondary. But when you look across the Patriot League, only one team averaged more than 210 yards, and half of the Patriot League averaged under 200 yards through the air. Richmond struggles through the air. I thought were primarily receivers dropping balls, not necessarily.
Richmond had some pretty catastrophic drops.
Yeah, I didn't think it was necessarily gaps in coverage. It was just, wow, those guys have literal sticks of butter for hands. Wow. So I will push back a little bit. I think their front 7 is pretty solid, pretty stout. I don't know about the secondary because what we saw of that secondary was not a no-fly zone, to put it lightly. I would certainly not take them over Idaho's secondary. Not a chance in hell.
I don't have anything to push back on. I mean, like Richmond, again, had they not dropped a couple of huge passes, it's honestly like a 3-score win. So
honestly,
because of the conference they play in, this is analogous. I'm going to make NCAA tournament men's basketball, women's basketball reference here. Hey, the FCS has auto bids, and just like in the NCAA tournament, sometimes the auto bid teams that make it in, like, they're not the top 64 teams in the nation. Just like Lehigh is not a top 24 team, but they're in, just like in the NCAA tournament. Like, sometimes when the favored or better conference teams win or lose, it's to these auto bid leagues. It's because the power conference team beats themselves by not taking the game seriously, by coming in with shitty intensity, by making mistakes, and then suddenly a team that has won a bunch of games and knows how to win, they have belief, and they're getting to play ahead instead of having to play behind. And for Lehigh, there's a way where this is kind of their Super Bowl. Like, honestly, last week was kind of like Lehigh's Super Bowl, so they get to play it again. So I don't know. I'm much more interested in the Idaho end of this, because again, I think that the only way Lehigh wins this is a close game where Lehigh is able to force mistakes and Idaho gets in its own way with dumb penalties and turnovers that just don't have to happen. And that's how the game is close. I think there's also a lot of ways where Idaho wins this game by three or four scores, and we all get to drive home at night pretty goddamn happy to see how the year closed out.
Bryan, I love that. That's kind of where I'm leaning at. But first, guys, before you can think about that magical drive to and from the Kibbe Dome, you got to think about a great all-inclusive week-long vacation right in your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy the multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or even the Selway. And you could check out special trips like one to see the Perseid Meteor Shower. Camp on pristine beaches, Bryan. Run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in the beautiful natural hot springs, and fish the most remote stretches of river in the entire damn United States. Just bring your clothes, and Colin and HRE are going to handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. You can call them out 406-540-4450. Again, that's 406-540-4450. Or check them out at hughesriver.com. Bryan, one thing that we haven't gotten to that I really wanted to point out at least once. This Saturday is going to be Lehigh's fourth ever indoor football game. Legitimately, the fourth time in program history they have played indoors. The first time was the Kibbe Dome in 1993, where Idaho won 77-14. I don't think Idaho is going to win by 63 this go round. Not a Simon Fraser-like rivalry here, but Bryan, this is a school that is currently practicing, I think, in an abandoned airplane hangar and pumping in crowd noise to try to get used to what it's like playing indoors, because they just haven't done it. There's just not a lot of domes out there in the Patriot League. Simon Miller, shout out. I was there. I was not. I was a year and a half old. Sorry to make everybody feel old. Bryan, speaking of old, burned.
Okay, so the Idaho end on this, guys. So what we saw of Richmond is one. Richmond was able to make Lehigh pay until they got inside the goal line, and Richmond clusterfucked themselves. What was Richmond able to do against Lehigh? Essentially whatever they wanted. Richmond's kind of shitty quarterback, Camden Coleman, was 24-37 for 199 yards and a touchdown, lost a bunch of yards plus at least one touchdown on terrible drops. Well, actually two touchdowns, but one of those was not dropped. That was an awful Coleman throw. And then on the ground, Richmond was able to run for over 5 yards a carry right around 5 yards a carry on 30 attempts against Lehigh, for the game. And that counts, just being completely clusterfucked in the red zone for quite a few plays. So what's Idaho going to be able to do? I think whatever they really want offensively. A part of the question is potentially health, as in To my knowledge, Nate Thomas is not going to be playing in this game. Day Buchanan's out. So what Idaho running backs are available is a meaningful question. Eli Cummings is a guy we may see. But just because we're hitting those question marks so much, I also think this is going to be a Jack Lane game. We've seen where Jack Lane can pick apart defenses, and the fact of Lane being able to complete lots of short to intermediate passes can recreate, a long drive anyway. So I don't know, like that's and we have also just seen the coaches do like to, when they have Jack Lane, they feel comfortable. They don't mind letting Lane drop back and throw a lot of passes. So just because of health, what I see is this a potentially Jack Lane game. And I don't think Lehigh's DBs are going to be able to match up with Jordan Dwyer and Mark Hamper. Like I just don't. Never mind that a guy like Mike Martinez, who doesn't catch tons of passes, but when he does, like they can matter. He's going to be a guy that Lehigh physically can't match up against. This is a game that Idaho is going to be physically superior. This is also one, and we've just seen this when Jack Lane's been playing. He's been doing very well. He's been doing exactly what we want the offense to look like. I mean, honestly, Lehigh defensively, one of the better analogies we may have is Idaho State as far as like actual talent. And Idaho had no trouble with that. So look, Jason Eck, one of the things that's been persistent for most of Jason Eck's tenure, Idaho doesn't not show up for games. Like Idaho doesn't show up flat. Like sometimes like it might take a half to like figure things out defensively, which has kind of been what Dan Jackson's done for most of the season, is go pretty base for a half and then really lock things up in the second half with adjustments. But offensively, that's not like Idaho with Jack Lane. No, they're ready to go essentially right out the gate. So I think that the key to this game for Idaho that I'm going to pay attention to is I think Idaho defensively should not have trouble locking Richmond up. And I bet the coaches have just beat the hell out of Richmond. Let Lehigh stay in the game with those big plays. Take away those big plays, and Richmond wins essentially in a shutout. There's no way the coaches aren't just banging that drum there. But on the offensive side of the ball is where I think Idaho with Jack Lane can get separation. And it's important for Idaho to get separation early for two reasons. One, to try to put a scrappy team to bed early, to just kill the hope that can make some of these playoff games matter, like more than you might think for the lower seeded or less talented team. But second, we know about injuries for Idaho. And to me, if the Vandals are going to have a fighting chance against Montana State, we need this game, especially the second half, to be a time that some of our best defensive guys can hang out on the bench and just take in their last game of the season in the KB Dome as a spectator.
Could not agree more with that, Brian. This is a game where if you are not Idaho targeting Sammy Iash with everything you've got from your pass rush, every single damn play, I question what you're doing. They're pretty solid on the interior line. Their center and right guard were both first team all conference guys. Their right tackle 6'4", 280. Their left guard started 5 or 6 games last year and almost every game this year. And then their all conference left tackle got hurt, and they're playing a true freshman right now at left tackle. That to me, Brian, is the story of this game. If Idaho can get to the quarterback and also beat the left tackle in the running game, I don't see how Lehigh has the horses to keep up with Idaho. I agree with you. I think Jack Lane and the offense need to get things going quickly. That way the defense can hopefully get some of those guys there on the snap counts, some extra snaps off in the second half. But I'm not that concerned with Idaho's offense. I think Idaho's offense is going to score points. I don't think that's going to be the problem. What I'm afraid of is Lehigh dinking and dunking their way to points more than they should. And the easiest way to blow that up is, man, go right at that left tackle. I'm sure they're going to protect him with tight ends. This is an offense that is 11 personnel in the base, but they do occasionally start in 12. They do trot out their tight ends primarily as blockers. Honestly, even when they have 3 receivers out there, there's only 2 guys that have more than double-digit catches. Like, this is a run heavy team. Bryan, 224 throws against 480 carries this season. That's, to me, you go hit that weak spot of that line and just blow it the fuck up. Patty Frakes, Idaho just has to play their game and they'll be fine. Like, that's, I think the big circle about point here is if Idaho shows up and plays consistently for 60 minutes, unlike maybe Northern Colorado and Weber State last year, and a couple moments this season that have felt, oh God, what the hell is going on out there? If you stay away from having any of those moments, which you do by unleashing Jack Lane early and blowing up their left tackle, this is a game I feel pretty confident in, Bryan. Like again, we're in the final 16 here, but the quality of opponent. If I'm Lehigh, I'm not super happy that I have to play Idaho in the second round. If I'm Idaho, getting Lehigh in the second round is a pretty big win.
No, and hey, last week against Richmond, like, hey, just to talk about the pass catchers for it's the Mountain Hawks, right? Yeah, for Mountain Hawks. Number one receiver, Jeffrey Jamil, number 9, leads the team. He's got 56 catches. Against Richmond, he was the only receiver to have more than one catch. He had 10. 10 for 137 yards and a touchdown. He was the guy getting big plays through the air. I mean, like, just to hit another key is, I don't think that Lehigh has the pass catchers or the quarterback to pick apart an Idaho zone, which in the first half, I'm talking about like in the first half, like when teams been able to move the ball against Idaho, so Idaho's playing base, and they're essentially saying, hey, like, do what you can over the middle, complete a bunch of passes for a long drive, high degree of difficulty, and then try to handle us in the red zone. Good luck. And for Idaho, that worked against every team they played this year who was not Oregon, Montana State, UC Davis, and almost worked against UC Davis and Oregon. I just don't think Lehigh has the guys. But Joffrey Jamil, if you're a Vandal and you're like, hey, who do we need to make sure that, who do we really want? Andrew Marshall locking down. That's the guy. If Marshall can make Jamil a non-factor, or stop him from getting the 10 catches for 137 yards, that's why Lehigh is still here. Then again, like, just Lehigh doesn't match up well with Idaho. So, like, hey, you talk about blowing up left tackle. Yes. I think this is a matchup nightmare for Lehigh, because I think Idaho is going to have no problem mostly sitting in zone to try to bottle up the run game, which will be the focus of Idaho. But I don't like, this isn't Dante Sacheret, who Idaho's terrified about running, and that's how the middle of the field opened up for Sacheret against Portland State. That's not this. This isn't Kekoa Vesperis, who's a threat in that way either. Honestly, this isn't even whoever the hell started for Cal Poly against Idaho earlier in the year, Bo Kelly, where Bo Kelly can at least get the ball out quick, and that's what Cal Poly did for a half. This is just a matchup where every single thing points in Idaho's direction, including the fundamental orientation of who Lehigh is.
Bryan, Kevin Marshall, the guru of FCS football, in the comment section, Lehigh doesn't have 3 dudes who would start for Idaho. Do your thing and win by 28. I don't know how many more ways to say it, Bryan. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Like, this is a nightmare matchup if you're Lehigh. And I think most teams in the playoffs at this point probably would be, but at what position group, if you break it down position by position, what position group do they feel better about than Idaho does? Probably their running backs, because again, they have 2 all-conference guys that are both healthy. Yeah, I think that's it. Like, this is just
neither of the running backs for Lehigh looked superior to what Idaho has.
No,
they're just not injured.
Yeah. So again, as we're saying all of these things, this is all the perfect type of bulletin board, like, ripe for upset material. So you got to take this game seriously, but man, on paper, this looks like it's going to be pretty tough for Lehigh. Christy and Jason Mayer in the comment section. Christy, is it Saturday yet? Get me to the Dome for a Vandal Smackdown and maybe some meatloaf tailgate at the unofficial Tubs at the Club tailgate. Reach out to one of the mayors if you're interested. And Jason Mayer, Lehigh playing with house money, I think that's their only advantage. I mean, it's their only advantage, and it is worth mentioning. Like, this is a team that won a playoff game. Let's say Idaho let's say their year 2 of their coach is the same as year 1 Jason Eck. If Idaho won a playoff game, we'd be thrilled. Like, that was a successful season. Hell yeah, we're going to celebrate this for decades. I think that's where this program is. Hey, you won a playoff game in year 2. Congrats.
6 consecutive wins.
Yeah. At this point, it is just house money, like Jason said. And so, look, when you got a team that has nothing to lose, traveling across the entire country to come play in the Kibbe Dome for the second time and only the 4th indoor game in your program's history, not maybe a great recipe for success, but man, that's why they play the games. And we've certainly seen Idaho punch down to opponents before. It could certainly happen. I'm not predicting it, but it could happen. I just think that Idaho's got too much going on, Brian, even without honestly anybody that's fully healthy in the running back room. I just don't see how this stacks up. Watching Lehigh and Richmond, neither of those teams, and we were midway through the first quarter, and I think our Discord was already popping off about, wow, neither of these teams look particularly impressive. I'm like, well, Richmond kind of does, but then they had 2 false starts at home inside the 5. Like, I guess the first one was on the 1 and the second was on the 6, but you have 2 false starts essentially inside the 5 or inside the 6, excuse me. Just not too scared, but James Aldrich in the comment section, my only concern is Idaho's playoff history in night games against teams from the East Coast. I hand up as the guy who hates the night games because I'm terrified of them. That is a little bit of a concern for me.
Okay, I'm gonna restate James's point and your point. If that is your actual concern heading into this game, it's because what you're scared about is something weird that has nothing to do with any matchup, that has nothing to do with coaching, is going to happen. That's inexplicable and keeps Lehigh in this game.
Yep.
Which is a way of saying you believe Lehigh, for this game to be competitive, needs a shit ton of luck to go their way and a lot of Vandal mistakes to go their way. Without both of those things happening simultaneously, just like Kevin Marshall said, Idaho just needs to do their thing. And offensively, this has been a good Idaho team for 5 weeks in a row. When Idaho was was having some tough games earlier in the year against the harder part of the schedule for sure. It was when Idaho wasn't scoring 36 a game during that point. This is the best Idaho's offenses looked the entire year. Yeah. This is an Idaho team that can get separation early and then not have to care as much in the second half. That's the template for this game that I want to see. But what I also want to see is it's just not, Idaho's not going to host a quarterfinal game. Okay. Montana State's not going to lose to whoever in God's name they play.
UT Martin.
Montana State's not going to lose that game. So the other thing that I'm more looking for in this game is I've never been, just because of my time as a Vandal, saying goodbye to Moscow on a win in a playoff type of setting. That's something else this team is playing for. To me, I've said this on the show for most of the season. I thought Idaho making the final 8 is this team actualizing what they can this season. So to me, Idaho wins this game. We shift into, was it Simon Miller earlier who said, like, hey, Lehigh is playing with house money. That's where, to me, Idaho wins here. Then when I talk about Idaho, I'm talking house money. So to me, Idaho kicking ass, and this gets to be a celebratory send-off for the seniors, is what I'm looking for the most.
Bryan, while you pull up a specific something to tell our listeners what we're doing to quench our thirst tonight, Devil's Advocate from James Jacobs. Game starting at 6 p.m. Pacific time will play to our advantage with them being an East Coast team. We thought that against Albany, and it didn't really work out that way. But I am willing to say let's flip the coin, and yeah, it's heads. It hopefully is going to be an advantage this time around.
Yeah, Jack Lane's not playing to not get hurt this year. the way I think McCoy was at the end of last season. So I like that. I just think that Idaho is looking better offensively each week than they had earlier in the year. That's just not the case of what we've seen in previous Idaho seasons. So there's a lot of things in Idaho's favor and a lot of things not in Lehigh's favor. If you think it's going to be close, it's because you think something weird is going to happen that there's no reason to predict. But something you can predict. You walk into an Idaho State liquor store, grab yourself a bottle of Snake River Stampede. One of the best whiskeys. I mean, to me, it's the best Canadian whiskey you can get in the Idaho State liquor store anyway. But when you factor in the entire liquor store and the quality of liquor plus price, Snake River Stampede is one of the single most, it's an economical buy. That's not a cheap buy. It's a good buy no matter what. It's a 3-grain whiskey, 80% corn, 10% rye, 10% malted barley, double barrel finish, first fill bourbon, then finished in Oloroso sherry casks. If you haven't tried one yet, grab a bottle right now. I always have at least 2.
Bryan, any final thoughts on the Vandals matchup before we get to Around the Big Sky and then finish with picking the score of Lehigh, Idaho?
I mean, hey, Brad Smith saying our offensive line is better this year too. Which it is, even with the, having lost 2 starting offensive linemen. We always said the number's 3. We were wrong. It was 2. That's just another thing. Another reason why, to me, this is a matchup nightmare for Lehigh and a matchup dream for Idaho is the guys at Lehigh who are most likely to give Idaho trouble defensively are, if they're playing, they're not at 100%. I don't know what else you could ask for as far as a matchup. Gary Graybow saying Wyoming whiskey is pretty dang good. Look, I haven't tried Wyoming whiskey, but if Wyoming whiskey decides they want to support the show, then we can talk. I've just tried Snake River. I know it kicks ass. That's what I want to talk about, man. Is I can talk about my 1915 small batch pour after a playoff win, which I'm looking forward to.
There we go, Bryan. Guys, around the bar, around the big sky, we're going to hit it. UT Martin at Montana State. We've already given you a bit of a preview of this game. Gentlemen, UT Martin versus number 1 undefeated Montana State.
Montana State.
UT Martin surprised New Hampshire, another CAA team, which this is what happens. I want to steal a Kevin Marshall talking point really quick. Kevin Marshall shits on the Big Sky because you can win the championship without playing the best teams. Like, hey, look at NAU. They made the play. Like, I was happy NAU made the playoffs, but NAU got their asses kicked. They clearly made the playoffs partially based off of dodging Montana State and UC Davis. So to bring up Kevin Marshall's point, the CAA looked at the Big Sky and they're like, well, the Big Sky's problem is they don't have enough teams. And that's how you get those top 3 teams in the CAA all have like 9-10 wins. None of them play each other. So, their records don't mean as much as you might think. I think UT Martin, they're strong defensively, especially on the ground, but like they don't play in the Big Sky or the Missouri Valley. So that doesn't necessarily translate. And you show me the team that has slowed down Montana State on the ground.
Yeah, and it's not going to be the UT Martin Skyhawks. Love Crew at 76 in the comment section. UT Martin because of Martin. And then James Aldrich 50-10 for MSU. James Jacobs MSU by 2 scores. Yeah, I mean, Bryan, I know they killed New Hampshire. Yes, they beat Tennessee State when they were ranked, but. No.
Tennessee State, who looked like if they're in the Big Sky, they probably would have finished 3-5, 2-6.
Yeah,
hey, not terrible, but not good.
Just no. Do I think Montana State's going to win the whole thing? Maybe not. And maybe they lose before the championship game, but I don't think it's this weekend, Bryan. Not a chance. Gentlemen, we're going to jump forward to the big one. Illinois State versus UC Davis. UC Davis hosting a playoff game.
Illinois State.
Martin, do you want to elaborate on that?
Love it. That's a no.
A few words.
Oh man. So look, I want to say UC Davis. Now, Illinois State has 10 wins and they play in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. So like that means a little bit more than 10 wins in the CAA. Now, I will say you scan through the Illinois State schedule, and what their best win was probably last week against Southeast Missouri State, winning 35-27. Other than that, next closest best win was probably North Dakota to close the season, and North Dakota did not make the playoffs against like playoff caliber teams in the Missouri Valley Conference. Illinois State got their ass kicked every time. So I don't know. I kind of feel like Illinois State may be more analogous to NAU or Montana, something like that, talent wise. So I'm going to go Davis. Land Larson absolutely robbed. Should have been in. If he didn't win the Walter Payton Award, he should have been at least in the top 3. He was not, which I don't know. I think I hate career achievement awards. Okay, I just absolutely hate it. So look, I think UC Davis was robbed. And I think UC Davis has a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder from the last few seasons for 2 reasons. One, UC Davis they were a borderline playoff team for like 3 consecutive seasons, and 2 of them they didn't make it. One of them they just chose to sit out. That was back around COVID time. But that plus getting locked out of the awards, I think that could mean something to Davis. Davis is strong on both sides of the ball, so yeah, I'm going to go Davis.
Yeah, I think Davis wins this game huge. James Aldrich in the comment section, 35-28 Davis. I know nothing about Illinois State. Andrew Whipple, can we just jump to volleyball talk? As long as it's not about Chris Gonzalez. Patty Frakes, Davis will win. Illinois State gave up like 600 yards last week. The 8 turnovers were SEMO just playing literal backyard football half of that game. And Kevin Marshall, books have UC Davis as a 6.5 favorite. They will win by way more. Yeah, I mean, this team made Iowa look good offensively in week 1. Anybody that follows the FBS at all knows that Iowa scoring more than 15 points is a fucking miracle. Doesn't matter if it's against a high school team. It's still impressive. And then they got absolutely boat raced by North Dakota State earlier in the year. I think UC Davis is much closer to being able to fight and punch with the Montana States and the 3 Dakotas that are 2, 3, and 4. I just don't see this being a game that UC Davis blows at home. Patty in the comment section mentioning Davis has only played 3 playoff games, which is nuts. And James Aldridge pointing out if they had a chance to play in the last 2 playoffs, like they should have, that number might be a little bit different. But no, a close win over SEMO does not make me think this team can beat UC Davis. And I think Lane Larson's going to be out for blood. The maybe game of the week in the non-Vandal category, guys. Montana at the former Fightin' X San Diego State University. That's actually South Dakota State University.
Like but huge deep cut, making the reference to Orich. Like talk about Eck, and then you talk about Orich's school.
You got what I was getting for. I just wanted to see if anybody was paying a whole lot of attention. Rob Orich looks like he's going to be going on to year 2 at SDSU. So good for him, former Vandal. Martin.
I think you all know where I'm going to go with this, and I think I'm going to guess. I'm not looking at our outline that we have, but I'm going to guess I'm probably not going to be the only one that's picking South Dakota State.
Yeah, I mean, I'm picking South Dakota State for sure. So, look, South Dakota State, they're the 3 seed. South Dakota State, they have absolutely no bad losses on the year. We know the defending national champions are well coached. We know they don't really beat themselves. And as far as a matchup for Montana, like Montana's gotten better defensively this year, but I don't think the type of play calling that we've seen out of the Grizz this year is going to let their talents shine the way they would need to be competitive against South Dakota State. So no, look, South Dakota State held North Dakota State 13 points. That's what this defense can do. And South Dakota State close season, they beat Missouri State 45-9. So Missouri State is they're solid Missouri Valley football team that Montana beat earlier in the year competitive. So now I think South Dakota State wins. I also think Montana they've shifted back to not knowing what they're doing quarterback wise. Logan Fife looked bad against Tennessee State, had 2 bad fumbles. Kealili Ayat came in and at least didn't have those couple fumbles. But the dude who won the game for Montana last week was Junior Bergen, 2 punt returns for a touchdown. But still, when I reference the play calling, Bergen was one of the most talented receivers in the Big Sky. He caught 1 pass against Tennessee State. Like that, for the first time this year, running back Eli Gilman for the Grizz, one of the best running backs in conference. This is the first time in his career he had 20 carries. So like, I don't know what in God's name Montana thinks they're doing on the offensive side of the ball, other than quarantining a bunch of guys who I don't know, at least they're not coaching elsewhere like here. So it's just a weird talk about Montana that way, because they're a good team. They are well coached in the things that they do well, but they're just frustrating because Montana beats themselves, but not on the field. They beat themselves strategically by not doing some things that could actually make the game more interesting, which is why, I think South Dakota State's going to beat the shit out of them. I think Montana's going to need it's kind of like Lehigh against Idaho. Montana's going to need a lot of luck to have any chance at a close win, and the only win Montana could get against a team like South Dakota State is a close win.
There's too many comments to shout out, but if you are listening to this on podcast services and you're like, hey, I like it when they call out the comments, what people are thinking, man, almost everybody in the comment section pretty much saying, man, Montana's going to get boat raced. Crewhead 76, Hawk is going to have to flip a coin every other play to decide the quarterback, which honestly might work out better for him. But I want to quickly call out Patty Frake saying there's no good matchups in this game for Montana, aside from Junior Bergen is good. But Kevin Marshall saying doesn't like the matchup for SDSU, thinks it's going to be close. The defense for Montana is getting good. They're playing young receivers they've held back. Fife can get them the ball. They can run the ball now. I like where Kevin's going with this, but I got to agree with the rest of the squad here. I don't think it's going to be close. I think South Dakota. Now I'm doing it. South Dakota State is just going to run right over them. I just don't see it. I don't think Hawk is going to ever let somebody run the offense well enough to hang on when you're probably going to get bullied around a little bit by the South Dakota offensive line. Shout out Brent Pease. Really glad he's not the Vandal coach. Their offensive coordinator has made their offense look so much better the last 2 years than it did the previous 5-6 years of the Hawk regime. So picking SDSU by a long shot here. Jason Mayer asking us, how about you three pick the Big Sky game with the smallest point difference? I think it's MSU UT Martin. Oh man,
that just sounds like.
I think Dave. No, dude, I think Davis. Illinois State.
Yeah, I'll go with Bryan on this one.
Well, Martin, if you're picking Illinois State to win, you're probably picking a close game anyway.
The vibes are just telling me Illinois State. I don't know anything about scores though.
So I do think that the South Dakota Montana game is going to be the closest score wise. I don't think it's going to feel particularly close, but I do think it's going to be pretty close. Considering that I think MSU blows out UT Martin, I think Davis is going to crush Illinois State. And then, spoiler alert, we're now getting into our Lehigh at Idaho score predictions. Ring the bell, Vandals. It is time for the end of this episode. Martin, your score prediction for this weekend's playoff game at 6 p.m. Pacific time in the Kibbe Dome, the final home game of the season for the Idaho Vandals.
I'm not going to say final because there's always a chance. And I'm going to go Idaho 49, Lehigh 14.
I'm going to say now, as also the president of the Bronco Mendenhall fan club, I believe that I'm obviously picking Idaho, and I think this could be an ass kicking. Idaho's been coming together the second half of the season. Offensively, that matters. That the week off matters for Idaho injury wise. I'm gonna go honestly. I think Kevin Marshall saying 38-13. I think that could be low. I think we could get I think we get 42-10. Like, I honestly think like Lehigh could not put together sustained drives against Richmond. And I think Idaho's more disciplined than we saw to Richmond. And I think that Idaho isn't going to be, they're not going to have the offensive plays that beat themselves, that you could understand that eventually translating to the defense letting down a little bit. So, no, I think this is Idaho's game to win. I think they're going to blow the shit out of Lehigh. And we're going to say goodbye to guys like, at least in Moscow, say goodbye to guys like Keyshawn James Newby. And, I mean, guys like Tommy McCormick. And send them off in like the happiest way we can. Every person who can get to Dome, guys, please get there. The playoff crowds are usually a little bit different, where, look, if we can get to 11, 12,000 in the Dome, that's going to be a good crowd. Mm-hmm. But the playoff crowds are usually people who give a shit. So it tends to be proportionately louder, proportionately more intense. If that sounds like a good time to you, which if you're watching the show, that has to sound like a good time to you, I'm going to see you in Moscow.
Amen. We're going to be hanging out in Section 7. Martin, I think, is going to be hanging out in GA.
Section 15, kind of by the students, so kind of by near the student section a little bit.
Beautiful. Thank you, Martin.
And if you can't make it to the game, join our Patreon and our Only Tubs Discord at patreon.com/Tubs at the Club.
#OnlyTubs. Thank you for the plug, Martin. Plug God, Martin. Guys, as we clean up the comment section here real quick, Captain 58 saying, hey, you know what? Thinks Montana's only going to score 7. So wanted to get that correction in there that Captain 58 is saying SDSU 45, Montana 7. Fingers crossed we see that. But hitting scores, Kevin Marshall, Idaho 38, Lehigh 13, Crewhead 76, 45, 17, James Jacobs 38, 7, Simon Miller 77, 14 before leaving the 93 flashback. 44, 13 is his prediction. 42, 13 for Turner Webb. 56, 10 for Jason Mayer after a 31, 10 halftime lead. Captain 58, 42, 10. Dane Moon 28, 0. James Aldridge 35, 14. Idaho Real Estate. Idaho over 40, and the D gets its first shutout. Love that. James Aldridge Holden B plays in the fourth quarter. Love that. Guys, I'm going to go 35-10. I love the idea of Idaho getting close to 50 here, but I've been burned by picking Idaho scoring high like that too many times. I do feel like this is going to be if Idaho can get out to a big halftime lead, this is going to be let's drain that play clock down to 2 every single time we snap it. Let's just drain this thing out and try to get out as fast as possible.
Yep.
I think it's
let's line up number 15 under center.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Bryan. All right, guys. Final call. I think I've already said that before, but final call. Any last thoughts, comments, concerns about Idaho Lehigh?
Not about the game, but just make sure to get there early. It is going to be a busy weekend in Moscow for the football game. Basketball, graduation. If you want to go to another game, women play in Mem Gym at 12 p.m.
They
are really fun this year.
They are doing quite well, which is quite incredible. Art Maria is doing a pretty damn good job getting that team starting off hotter than they have in quite some time.
Actually, I want to enunciate one basketball thing. Martin, we haven't talked about this in private. It's like, hey, # producing in public. We're going to shift to basketball stuff like when football's over, guys.
Oh, yeah.
We're probably going to have a little bit more even men's, women's coverage this year on the main show than we typically have. Just as kind of the thing we're looking at. So if you're waiting for basketball coverage, good news, bad news. It's coming.
It's coming, yeah.
The bad news is like you're going to wait for football. But the good news is you're waiting for football, right?
Yeah. But if you do want anything, there is a quick women's basketball episode they did last week. And Bryan, is that a friend of the duster behind you sitting on the stool?
Paperwork, sure.
On the stool, is that a pair of gloves?
Uh-oh.
Jesus Christ.
Are you friends with Mason? I didn't know that. I didn't think Mason liked you very much.
Well, he blocked me on Twitter, so presumably we're not that close.
Oh, well.
I don't know why.
That's beats me like a dead horse. Jason Mayer, final comment. Hot meatloaf and potatoes starting at 3:00. Again, if you don't know where the Mayer tailgate is, it only costs a couple bucks to join the Patreon. Get into our Discord. You can ask them right there. Just a quick little DM or a message into any one of the threads. Somebody's going to help you out. Come join us.
Say, if you join our Patreon, patreon.com/TubsTheClub, you will get a pretty in-depth discussion throughout today about why I am president of the Bryan, Arnzen, and the Bronco Mendenhall fan club.
Hashtag bell emoji.
Ring that fucking bell, boys. Bronco Mendenhall forever. Why go for a coach with a limitless sky when you could? That's probably going to get you to 500.
And with that,
go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
go Vandals. Oh, crap.